Hi everyone and welcome to the archives. This is one of those special episodes where we get to sit down with fashion people that I meet along the way, people that I really admire, that I do think are shaping the industry, as well as rewriting its rules. In today's episode, we have the very first guest, which is Nick Knight. Welcome, Nick. How are you?
I'm good. You brought the sunny weather with you, so
Of course.
it's all looking very lovely in London today.
You look flawless, by the way.
Flawless.
Yeah, I really love your suits. Who makes your suits?
They're vintage now because I used to work for a tailor on Savile Row called Kilgar, and Kilgar sadly is no longer with us. But in the 1990s, 2000s, I worked for them for quite a long time, and they would pay me in suits.
No way.
Yeah, which is, they would pay me, it was never equivalent to what I would have been paid as a day rate, but just the fact that somebody gives you something physical and says, thank you, here's a suit, feels so special and so exciting. Because otherwise the money comes in, goes into the bank account and pays the mortgage or the electricity bill, or you never feel it. So there's never any feeling of the sort of satisfaction of having done a job for somebody
and getting
something back. So I was paid in suits, and then that's just continued. I started wearing suits all the time.
You've said several times that you don't define yourself as a photographer, but more of an image maker.
Yeah.
Can you break down for us the difference?
When I first started, what I did was photography, and that's very understandable as a medium, and the parameters that define the medium of photography are quite set. So Richard Avedon will be doing the same medium as Ashtay, and Mapplethorpe will be doing the same as Muybridge. So, all through the history of photography, it's defined by the same parameters. As soon as you had digital photography in the middle of the 90s, you're suddenly starting to do things which are outside of those parameters. So now, for instance, I can take my mobile phone and I can take a picture of you, which I can then make move, or I can make a sculpture from my phone. So I'm doing things which are quite outside of the parameters of photography. So in the end, I thought, well, what I do takes on so many other disciplines. So filmmaking, sculpture, performance, all those sorts of things. So why am I calling myself a photographer? Because that's just part of the medium that I practice. And I think really since the middle of the 90s, since there's been a sort of big digital revolution, we really haven't got a good name to describe what we do. We're all generalists. We all do multiple things.
Okay.
And I think I just felt that I didn't want to just say I was a photographer, partly because then you get a lot of people saying, well, that's not photography. Because we have a bust here of the boxer, Francis Ngannou, which was created on my mobile phone.
I also almost never know how to label myself, and I feel like
Yeah.
other people that I meet in my network, they also have a hard time because everyone is doing a little bit of everything or just mixing arts as as forms of communication.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure we will get on to talk about AI, but AI
Yes, we will.
is part of that sort of new medium that started in the middle of the 90s with the advent of the internet and with digital image making becoming something that we all do. We all take pictures on our mobile phones now. And that frees us up from the whole of the sort of slightly the heaviness of photography. Photography is an established medium and a beautiful medium, but it's not a very flexible medium. It does what it does, and it doesn't, now I can pick up my phone, take a film, do a broadcast, create a statue, make my still images move, change the backgrounds, change the heads round, make something that's 2D into 3D. That's all really, really exciting. And my relationship with my audience, which is another part of it, is much, much different than what it used to be. So when you work for magazines up until the middle of the 90s, I had no relationship with my audience. Because in the magazine world, you send your pictures into the magazine, and then 3 months later, the magazine comes out. But there's nothing, prior to the internet, there is no way your audience can express their opinions. And so as an artist, it's a bit unsatisfying to be completely divorced from your audience. We all need, as human beings, some form of, what's the best way to put it?
Recognition.
It's partly recognition,
or
it's
like
partly
understanding,
praise, it's
having
partly...
someone that understands. No.
It's all of those things. It's all of the human things we want out of life. If you just have nobody you're speaking with, if nobody ever says you've done anything good or bad, etc., then where do you find that part which is necessary as a human being to have that rapport, that interaction with your audience? Otherwise, you're just creating. I know that artists shouldn't think about their audience when they create. They should just create what they want to create. But I think there's a complete divorce from your audience. You imagine how somebody in a band would feel if they went out onto stage to an empty auditorium, so there's nobody in the crowd.
Yeah.
You know, all those fantastic performers from Elvis Presley to, you know, I mean, whoever you care to mention, Johnny Rotten to, you know, to whoever, you know, they need the audience. But as a photographer, you're an artist, but you had no relationship to your audience whatsoever. It was complete. And the only time you'd get to have a relationship would be if you had an exhibition, but then you're not really talking to you're talking to your fans, and I think that's also a bit weird. So I've always shied away from doing gallery shows and exhibitions because I don't want to talk to people who are already. So that's not. I want to just. I actually really like it when my pictures just go out on buses and in magazines and on billboards and on record covers, because people don't walk down the street and go and see one of your billboards. It's a big billboard campaign for Dior. People see it en passant. They see it, you know, Margiela, you know, without having to elect to go and see it. And I like that communication. I like the fact that somebody's going to go and pick up their kids for school and they notice something that might change how they think or might modify, you know, their life or whatever. I like that. I'm not so keen on the idea of this sort of presentation in the gallery where people who already love your work come and see it.
Yeah,
and, you know,
I know what you mean.
And also there's the whole thing, sometimes it's important to look back, but I've never really wanted to very much. So I don't like doing retrospectives, I don't see my work as trophies. So I don't see what I do as something that should be as a piece of work on a pedestal. I don't see my work as a sort of trophy on a pedestal that people should be reverential to. My work is a communication, and it's an ongoing communication. And what I said 10 years ago, I don't want to say it again. I don't want to keep on talking about it. It was part of a communication I was doing or part of a conversation I was having 10 years ago. I don't want to see it again. You know, it's like me saying to you, so what's the best thing you've ever said? You think, oh, I don't know.
I don't know what's the best thing I've ever said.
You know, and let's put up your best sentences. Mm-hmm. It's like, to me, life's exciting and is permanently evolving and permanently changing. And photography, image making, is just a way through that. It's just part of, you know, how we express that. But it isn't about making trophies. So
it's very beautiful, Nick. You kind of like touched base with something I wanted to discuss with you, which is collaboration.
Yes.
Collaboration has always been part of your work, evolution, and I do believe myself that the exchange that you get in collaborating with other creatives in the industry is essential for growth, is essential. So obviously with your relationship with McQueen, maybe we could touch base about that as well.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe you can walk me through like how it was to like just process together and work on creative projects.
Yeah, well, so you're quite right. Collaboration is super important in what I do and super important in the fashion world. And it's a real privilege to be able to try and understand life through how John Galliano sees it, or how Ray Kubo sees it, or how Margiela sees it. That's fascinating. They're incredible people, but to be given the privilege to see through their eyes and to try and rationalize the world around us and their desires, that's a real privilege. And it's also a real joy because, of course, they're not me. So they rationalize the world in a way that I wouldn't. I think that's really exciting. So it's about experiencing things in a different way. It's always good to know.
To have different perspectives on maybe even the same topics.
But it's true, you know, if I'm working, so you talked about Alexander McQueen. Now, Alexander McQueen was an amazing person. But when we did a session, it's also really important to realize you were working with Michael Clark, the dancer, or you were working with, you know, a fantastic model, or you were working with a brilliant hairdresser, or a brilliant makeup artist, or even a brilliant assistant. You know, those are all people who are in this. So fashion photography and fashion image making is very much a group activity. It's very much something you do trying to understand other people's vision with the help of other people, coming in and saying, well, actually, because, you know, people don't give the rest of the crew enough recognition. So I worked a lot with Sam McKnight, not so much for Alexander McQueen, but certainly for Dior. And what the hairdresser Sam McKnight would do to the model was incredible. You know, these beautiful models would come down, but they'd spent 2 hours with Sam doing their hair, and he would put them in such a great state of, state of mind, such a great mood, that you'd have a really fantastic person to work with. The models would be really G'd up to do it. They really understand what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Sam is fantastic with women, fantastic. So those things are really important. When you look at the images, it's not just when I've clicked a button. It's not just about Alexander McQueen having an idea. It's all of the process which goes on from the moment of conception. So when you start thinking, I'd like to do some pictures of a boxer, and it starts to roll, and you think who and how and what for, etc., etc. All the way through the shoot, and then also the post-production. So when I've done the shoot, and the day after, I sit upstairs here with Mark, my retoucher, and we start to look at the images and try things out and try different backgrounds and stretching them and pushing them and trying different heads and trying to make the images come together. There's an awful lot of that goes on, that people just have no idea that that's so much a part of photography. It always has been. So right from conception to completion is a journey. And people don't grasp that yet. It's why I started SHOWstudio, which is in a way to be able to have a space where people could see and they could understand the process of creating an image. It isn't like that. But you asked me specifically about Alexander McQueen.
It was an example. I think you kind of
like... example.
Yes, a very good example.
I don't know quite what you want to find out about that. Lee was a fantastic person to work with. We started working really, really early together once he had just come out of college. I'd seen his work. I first came across his work working for American Vogue, funny enough. I was working with a stylist called Camilla Nickerson, very, very good stylist, and she was showing me the clothes before the shoot, and she said, oh, these are amazing. She got off the rack some of Alexander McQueen's clothes, and we were looking, oh, they're fantastic. I said, I can't wait to shoot them. She said, well, we're not really going to shoot them because he doesn't take out any advertising, so they're not going to give him a page in the magazine, so we're not going to shoot them. I just wanted to show them to you. So that's how I first started seeing his clothes. I don't like going out to dinners. I don't like going
Oh my God, I'm the same, Nick.
So I'm sure you have to do it a lot more than I do.
I have to do it a lot, yes.
For this one, because it was Vogue, I said I'd go. So I was there, not in a good mood, thinking, oh, I don't want to be here. And I could see across the other side of the room, Lee McQueen sitting, thinking exactly the same thing, sitting in the corner, I don't want to be here. Anyway, I got up to go, and I thought, well, I'll go and say hello to him, because I really like what he's doing. So I said hi, chatted for a minute. And that's how we first met. And then we would send faxes to each other, because back in the day.
Oh my God,
yeah, so
I love that.
So sadly, the problem with a fax, Emily, is it fades. So for posterity, when the faxes become, it's not like a photocopy, it's not like a Xerox.
Okay.
Faxes were printed on thermal paper, so they fade over time. So the original faxes from Alexander McQueen are just gone.
Oh my God.
It's a shame.
It's a shame. But I'm learning so much with this interview. I did not know this fun fact about fax.
So we started this sort of fax love affair of sending each other little kind of messages, and he'd send me a drawing and I'd send him out. And then eventually, I can't remember exactly, we did something for the Venice Biennale or the Florence Biennale together. And then, I guess we found a way of, being with each other that was mutually beneficial. I mean, I saw the world that he was showing me, which was amazing, and I liked how he was so extreme in what he wanted to do. Never pulled back, never sort of trying to do something by half. So always, and his vision was quite, he's playing a lot on imagery from the more difficult parts of life and death. So he was very fascinated, I think, with death. And a lot of the images we would do about that. And now it's really quite extreme compared to what fashion imagery tends to be now, because people are very careful now.
Absolutely.
And we weren't. At the time, we were not careful. So we never thought it was a problem to do anything, however offensive. It being offensive was actually kind of okay.
Why do you think now it's different? Is it because of social media and the fact that everyone gets access to it?
Yeah, I think you have a lot more voices in it now, and a lot more space for people to express opinion. I think that's entirely good. I don't think it was better in the day, back in the day. I think it was just different. I think it's entirely appropriate that people should say, excuse me, that image is really offensive. I'd rather You know, you realize how offensive that is to me, and how I don't mind that. That's fine. If somebody wants me to address them in a certain way or to use a certain way of speaking, I think that's courtesy. You know, I don't want people to be upset. Well, I don't go through my life trying to upset people, but certainly not anymore. So no, I'm not at all one of these people that thinks, oh, you know, it's all, all woke. I hate that. You know, people should have some empathy. If somebody's getting upset because you're calling them something they don't want to hear, how difficult is it just to readdress your language? They have to deal with whatever the circumstances in their life, whether it's mental health or, you know, whatever it is. So I think it's a kind of very small ask for us to use a slightly different version of the language. We all quite happily did it when we're talking about people of colour. You know, we don't use the N-word. That's fine. One wouldn't want to. Why would you want to? So it's the same for me. Everything else is like that too. So I think we are living through a much more empathetic time. I think it's entirely good. So although when Alexander McQueen and I were working together, I think there was no, again, it was before the internet. So there was you had no contact with your audience. You had no idea what your audience were thinking. You had no idea who was looking at the pictures and what they were thinking about them. So the stuff would just go out into magazines and wherever it would go, and you would never hear back. So there was no idea whether you were offending people or not.
Yeah.
I think where it changed, because I said earlier on, that was very frustrating, that feeling that you're not in contact with your audience. You're just working, and the only time you can tell whether you're doing a good job is whether they pay for your first class ticket next season. You know, it's not a very humane way of feeling some sort of reward for what you're doing. I think this is probably the most exciting time in the whole of my career.
Okay.
Is now, and is tomorrow.
Why?
So, because,
explain, please.
Because I can do things now I couldn't even imagine before. So AI I'm trying not to deal too much with AI straight away, but AI, for instance, at the moment, I can take a still image of you. So I can pick up my phone, I can take one still image of you. I can then put that into an AI, and I can make you move. And so, but when you move, where are you going? You know, what are you doing, et cetera, et cetera. We had on SHOWstudio, we have a fashion journalist, an AI fashion journalist called Ibri Grace.
I love that.
Ibri Grace is great, but we had to program Ibri Grace. So we had to say to Ibri Grace, is Ibri Grace friendly? Is he sarcastic? Is he amorous? Is he flirtatious? Is he, you know, whatever. So we tried all these things. So this makes it sound much more complicated than it is, but it's just a slider. So it says, you know, 0% sarcastic, 100% sarcastic, and you set it somewhere just to get the right tone of conversation. Yeah. I set it to 100% sarcastic. You really don't want to do that.
No?
No, it's
what did it say?
He said to me, we had an unpleasant conversation, I said goodbye. And he responded, yeah, bye, don't let the door smack you on the head on the way out. So
Rude.
They can get really quite nasty. And the whole conversation, I only spoke to him for a couple of sentences, but the whole conversation was really unpleasant. I just thought, you don't want to do this. You don't want to set your AI
journalist to be like
to be so unpleasant and so mean. So yeah, but all of that I think is fascinating. So I'm creating a character.
Powerful.
So when I was doing photographs back in the 90s with Lee, we were creating characters. So the people in our photographs were characters. They had some sort of like Devon, you know, with a gash and the kind of, you know, they were characters. They were like imaginary characters that had, but
their
now
own
I can
story
make
that
them,
it was like narrated through the image.
Yeah, now I can make them, I can give them a personality. They can say things, they can move, they can almost have their own lives. So I think it's getting more and more fascinating. The possibilities now are just mind-blowing, absolutely mind-blowing.
I agree with you, and I love the fact that you have such a positive idea of AI, and I just feel right now there's like whole discourse on the internet where people are afraid that AI will take everyone's jobs.
Yeah.
So it's very beautiful to hear someone with your experience and, you know, your background thinking, okay, this is something that it will be great. It's a tool that will be powerful and we can actually use it in the right way instead of like being terrified by it as an image maker.
I think if you can compare it to two important points in history, one, the advent of writing. When writing was first invented, or it was only the sort of scholars, and often the religious scholars, who could write. So you had these monks sitting away in monasteries drawing, the illuminated text.
Yes.
So you had the, about it. These fantastic things, but the rest of the population couldn't write. And then all of a sudden you have Martin Luther, who decides everybody should be able to read the Bible, and there's a printing press. But they tried to burn him. They were terrified of him, because they were terrified of the power of information getting out to the populace, and the populace not being so easy to control anymore. So writing was a big threat. And the same thing happened with the Industrial Revolution. We are at a point now with the digital revolution. We are pre the digital revolution. We're just at the beginning of it. It's going to be huge.
I agree with you on that.
Imagine if you were in the same place with the Industrial Revolution. Here we are, standing in a field with our forks and our cows and our sheep and our potatoes, and saying, "Oh, this thing called the Industrial Revolution is going to take all our jobs." Yeah, probably, but life will change. So, the funny thing about AI and part of the digital revolution happened, we can't see it. It's fine, we can look back at the beginning of writing, we can look back at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, or we can look back at the Industrial Revolution, and we know how it started, what it did, and how it ended. With AI and with the digital revolution, we're just beginning. We have no idea where it's going to go. We have no idea any of that sort of stuff at all. And so to enter into it with simply fear, there should be an appropriate amount of fear, because change always, in some way, makes people fearful. But it shouldn't be our defining feeling on the future is fear. That's not right. So I look at it in terms of what my use is for it, and I think it's fascinating. I can put a picture into an AI and be given a poem back. I can put some prose, some writing into an AI and be given a sculpture back. I can make that sculpture move. It's just completely broken every division in how we communicate down. I think it's fascinating. But of course, change will mean change.
I'm very happy to hear you say this, because it's very similar to what I think about AI. And you're the first person that I talk to that actually says this, because everyone around me is
good.
quite
How
terrified.
interesting.
I use it a lot for as an organizational tool, to be honest, rather than the end of what I do. I write also a lot, so I tend to not use it for writing or for correcting, because I like to be very raw with my writing and very real, let's say. Not informal, maybe that's the word. So my biggest flaw is that I'm not very organized. I really need help, like in my everyday, like getting by and like just doing my tasks and dividing my weekly tasks and stuff like that. It has been the perfect assistant.
It's a fascinating time. I think we are living through such a great time.
I always embrace change as well. I'm very fascinated by how things can just, from one moment to the other, just be completely different and change my perspective completely. That it's very powerful.
The sort of comments and arguments I hear are very similar about photography and AI, are very similar to when photography was first invented, and the painters of the day were saying, this mechanical medium has no possibility to reflect the beauty of human emotion that a painter can. It's just a machine. How could it possibly have any? But of course, now we probably agree that photography is very emotional as a medium, and blah, blah, blah. And I think it's the same sorts of things. And
It was the same also with the telephone, the television, and all of the...
When we started SHOWstudio, nobody was doing
Oh my God, Nick, sorry to interrupt you. You really are touching base on so many questions that I wanted to actually ask you. And the next one was exactly about when did you start SHOWstudio and why? So please, yes.
Okay, well, we started SHOWstudio. It was, nobody else was doing fashion film because it wasn't the medium. Where would you put it? Prior to the internet, where would you put a fashion film? You're not going to show it at the cinema.
Or in TV.
You don't show it on TV. So there is nowhere to put it. So there are some of the great fashion photographers. Mostly there was nowhere for these people to put them. So they tried it out and they got out their Super 8 or their whatever it would be. They did some filming of the models and it was great because they were great image makers. But no, it could go nowhere. When we started SHOWstudio in 2000, all of a sudden there was a platform upon which you could put moving fashion. So, and it had occurred to me, and the story goes that when I was photographing Naomi Campbell in 1986, and she was in a red Yohji Yamamoto coat,
Oh my God.
scarlet, beautiful, and she was moving across a white background, and the flash was going off, and she was dancing to Prince. He'd given her a tape, and she was listening to that, and there were like 5 people in the room, 6 people in the room, and I thought, Yohji has designed this piece of clothing to be seen in movement, but the only thing people are going to see is a still image. That's it. But every designer.
That's what inspired you? That was your moment?
That was my moment.
Wow,
That's my moment. I
interesting.
realized 2 things. One, that every single designer creates a piece of clothing to be seen in movement. They never created to be seen as a still image. Why would they? I would say, why wouldn't do the back? So everything is about how the cloth moves. It used to be, back 100 years ago, it used to be how it sounded. The scroop, which is a rather unpleasant name for the sound of taffeta on taffeta.
Yeah.
You know, the quality of the taffeta your dress was made of made a different sound. So the sound was really important. But they never ever created a garment to be seen as a still image. Of course, there's been amazing photography like by Avedon and Penn and countless great photographers. But it's always been, to my mind, a bit of a compromise in the designer's vision. So that's what I thought when I was doing the red coat. I thought this was created to move. I must be able to show some movement. And then I looked around the room. There was Naomi. There was the brilliant French art director Marc Ascoli. There was Orlando Peter. There was Leslie Chilks, a makeup artist, a hairdresser. I had my assistant Andy. That was it. So
the only people who got to see
the only
that.
people who say it. So I thought, well, this is such a shame. People have no idea what happens in fashion studios. This is 1986. Nobody knows what's going on in fashion studios. So, and I'm really excited by what I'm seeing in fashion studios. These bits of fashion theatre. Naomi Campbell, who was 17, dancing to Prince in this beautiful scarlet coat, looking amazing. Lots of people would love to see this. So, rewind forward 15 years, and the end of the 90s, and it became, with the advent of the internet, it became possible to have a platform upon which you could show fashion film.
What was the first show that you live streamed on SHOWstudio?
Well, the first event we live streamed, it wasn't a show, but I'll come to that. The first event we live streamed was called Sleep. And
Okay, what was it?
It was in 2002, 2003. SHOWstudio opened in 2000, about 2 or 3 years later. And it was, we hired a whole floor of a hotel, hired it. We got given a whole floor of a hotel, the Metropolitan Hotel. Put a webcam over the bed, and we got a model in, Liberty Ross, and we did her hair, we did her makeup, we put her in a beautiful dress, and we said to her, Liberty, go to sleep. And so she lay on the bed under the webcam, and at the time you could only broadcast 1 single frame every minute. We broadcast pictures of Liberty sleeping. And there was Lise Crombez, and there was Fanny Bostrom, and there was a whole bunch of fantastic models. We put them all in different rooms, and they all slept in the bed. And as they moved, because you're looking down on them, it's like an Avedon picture of somebody, because the dress is moving. It's like flat on the bed, so it looks like it just looked like fashion pictures. Because when you describe it, it sounds a little bit voyeuristic or heavy or perverted, or it felt a little bit kind of sexual. And it wasn't like a dream. It was like a sort of, not a dream, it was like a painting.
Yeah.
Because the quality of the webcam was rubbish, but that in that lo-fi quality is real beauty, because it's not perfect. It has all the flaws of technology, which I love personally. I love things that are mistakes, that are broken, that don't work. I love all of that. So it had that, they look like Klimt paintings. They were like, no way were they Helmer Newton-y kind of sexual, whatever. So that was the first, that was 2002, 2003. Then we did Transformer, which was, we invited over 2 or 3 days, we invited people to come in and do a transformation, a live transformation.
What was that?
About 2004 or something like that. I can't really remember. 2004, it was early 2000. And Alexander McQueen came in and did one which has been called The Bridegroom Stripped Bare, where he's had a man, a very beautiful model, stand on a plinth like that, in one of my Yohji Yamamoto suits. I had a cream Yohji Yamamoto suit, which I sacrificed for this. And Lee basically went round it and tore it apart. Literally tore the sleeves off it, tore the pelt off it, wrapped some gaffer tapes, duct tape around the middle, turned the top of it into a dress, and then got some white emulsion paint and threw it on the thing, and with his hands made it into and just sculpted this transformation from a man to a woman, from a bridegroom to a bride. So that was then, but the real first, you asked me which was the first show we broadcast, and it was Alexander McQueen's Plato's Atlantis. So
the show that broke the internet.
Yeah, that one. So I'd been asking Lee to do a show live, because when we did Transformer, he loved doing that, and he loved the performance. And I said, well, we should do one of your shows live. But to be honest, Emily, at the time, it was the internet was a really clunky, not fit for purpose, not very easy to use medium.
It was wild, yeah.
We had one of the big companies gave us quite a lot of money to get enough bandwidth to have, I think it was 30,000. I think we had enough bandwidth for 50,000 people to come and watch at the same time.
Wow.
Which cost a lot of money. I won't tell you how much, but a lot, a really lot.
A lot.
But it was a big company, so whatever. And we decided to do it, and I did all the rehearsals with Lee, and for 2 months we were planning it and talking about it, et cetera, et cetera. And it was the one with the cameras that followed the models down a runway, and then would turn on the audience and follow the front row down, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that was the first one we did. But the stories you probably know behind that is that Lady Gaga, who at the time wasn't as big as she became, decided to release her single Bad Romance as the finale.
Iconic.
However, nobody told us that was going to happen. And when we did the rehearsal at 3:00 on the afternoon of the show, which was at 7, they had, I think it was The Little Mermaid, or the Walt Disney soundtrack, The Little Mermaid, was the finale, or The Jungle Book. It was one of those two. So we had no idea. And so I don't know whether Lee decided to do it at the last minute, or whether or whether Gaga hadn't sent him the track, so it wasn't the thing. Anyway, so we started to broadcast, and I've never seen it since or before. It felt like the computers melted in front of my eyes as 6 million little monsters, Gaga fans, came to try and watch it at the same time.
Oh my God.
And it was, I think the people who were operating the computers at the time just went,
They were
ballistic. I'd never seen it before. 6 million people at one time. I don't even know if you could do that now. Because you put different servers across the world, and you have one for China, one for Australia, one for America South, one for America North. You'd have to really kind of distribute the weight. But we didn't have that bandwidth.
But did it crash, or it crashed? At which point of the show did it crash?
It depends on where you were watching. I think from London, because I was in Paris, because it was a big show in Paris. So I was in Paris, and SHOWstudio was here in London, and people were phoning me from SHOWstudio and saying, it's going really weird, it's going really glitchy, it's slowed down. And we had a lot of people who had come to SHOWstudio to watch it at SHOWstudio.
Oh God.
So it was a little bit of a kind of...
No pressure.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a bit tricky, and I was, if I'm honest, I was gutted. I was really upset, because I thought, this is something Lee and I had been planning. He really wanted to do this. He really wanted anybody to be able to see the show. It was all a democratic thing. And I think he and I felt really let down. But it changed. It changed the fashion world, because that was the first show. Helmut Lang did one, but it was just stills like 2 years beforehand.
Yeah.
It was just still imagery. But Lee's was the first live broadcast of a fashion show. And it changed completely. So then after that season, the next season, 70% of London fashion shows attempted to be broadcast live.
Oh my God.
So that's a huge change. And then of course, then you realize, okay, well, we should be doing, if the audience are seeing the clothes as they hit the runway, we should be able to do buy direct from catwalk. But of course, the whole machinery of the fashion world isn't set up to be able to respond like that.
No, absolutely not.
So that didn't really work. And then they said, okay, well, and now it's changed again, because we have social media now, and everybody like yourself and like SHOWstudio are there with their cameras, and we're broadcasting, so it happens in any case. Everybody can do it on a mobile phone now.
But I feel like now there's like the counter trend of this. So with you and the show of McQueen, I feel like fashion really got democratized. Everyone was able to like bite into it. Everyone was able to like consume it as a medium and desire the clothes and maybe shop. And this was awesome, but I feel like now brands are going back. Fashion Week is becoming exclusive again, more exclusive again. Brands don't really want to have you there filming. There are brands who don't allow filming during the catwalk. So,
it's fashion.
yeah.
So it's always going to do that. That's what fashion is by definition. What was fashionable last season is not fashionable this season. There's always that change.
Yeah.
Happens all the way through fashion in terms of the clothing, in terms of the designer, in terms of the photographer. Photographer who's really popular at the moment will not be popular next season. I mean, it's a bit of an exaggeration. That's what fashion is.
Yes.
And that's interesting because that's an inherent dynamic in the medium of fashion, its ability to change and its desire to change, which isn't the same in any other art medium. So that's kind of interesting in itself. And there's always been this sort of, is one of the things that makes fashion so important is its exclusivity. So the fact that you have a coat, but nobody else does. And you were the first person, is that a motivation that actually that forms fashion? Is it that desire to have something pre-everybody else that everybody else is going to want? Is it that desire to have something that makes you feel great? Last season, if you put the same coat on, you might not have felt great, but this season, it just feels right. And you've got to have it. And you don't want everybody else to have it. You want to be the person having it.
You just described myself, basically.
Well, that's the thing. And there's two opinions on this. I've talked to quite a few people who say, well, actually, if you show the fashion show and you let everybody see it, then it takes away from the magic and the kind of things that for me, that doesn't quite ring true with where we are with communication, with how we function in societies. Yes, it's great to have small fashion shows that are exclusive and nobody can have a camera. It's fine, but it's not really where we're going. There's a trend away from lots of things. In the end, life changes.
Yeah.
And although it might have been better in the day, and it's also nostalgically nice. And it's like the thing about magazines. Magazines have been dead for years.
But now they're coming back again.
Now they're coming back as exclusive, small, little, sells 100 copies, etc., etc.
Yeah.
But that's not the main magazines.
I feel like magazines have really done, after COVID, like a step up in terms of content creation and social media. They finally realized that social media is actually a tool that they could use to their advantage. So because there was all of this, like in 2010s, all of this fight between press and influencers starting to have access and having way bigger numbers than magazines, so being booked instead of journalists. And then now when magazines kind of like caught up on that, okay, we could also create content in-house how influencers do. It kind of like, it becomes again that magazines have that importance and that impact by creating content online.
Yeah, there's a change going through the whole of the fashion industry. It's really in a state of flux, trying to find what it is. Some people don't even have catwalk shows, they don't go through shops, they sell direct online, etc. It takes out of all the systems. There used to be a very simple system that in a way define what the fashion industry was. The editor would go and see a fashion show in Paris, and they would then report back to their senior editor who would decide what stories were going in the magazine for that season. So everybody in Paris is doing the skirt length is longer, everybody's doing this, that, now, and that's what everybody would do. It was coherent across, because there was only one source, it was only really in Paris, and then, that's what fashion was. So it was very simple, very mono, very no other alternative. And then of course, when ready-to-wear was invented, things changed. So things changed and they democratized. There are always going to be this slight sort of feeling that, it was better then, or we loved it when it was then. But that partly comes from the idea of exclusivity, but that's not what really fuels fashion. And fashion finds its way. What's exciting about fashion, why it's exciting as a medium, is because it's so about our cultures. If you want to study a culture, look at its fashion, because fashion shows you what that culture desires to be, not what it is. That's reportage. It's what it desires to be.
That is so beautiful, Nick. It's very inspiring what you just said. But it's so real.
It's how you see what a society wants to be seen as. So it's that that's always exciting. And I was thinking, what we're going to talk about. I was driving in this morning. I said, I've loved fashion, and I love fashion in so many different forms. I used to love, I was a skinhead for 5-6 years, and that's a particular fashion, which is purely about
very
stating, very specific, very socially kind of. People knew what you meant when you dressed that way. It was a whole bunch of things, which was an interesting thing in itself. So I love that. But then skinhead gave way to a completely different fashion, the fashion of the football casual, with the kind of Italian brands, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And you saw all of a sudden you've got these working class lads who are on the terraces, but they're wearing, kind of pale yellow, and they're wearing light blue, and they're wearing, kind of Saint Laurent. And all, it's like really strange mixture of things. Anything you want to mention, fashion is such an important thing. You look at France after the revolution, l'incroyable et merveilleux, such an influence on John Galliano. And this were people who were royalists, so they were against the revolution, they were against that, but they would go out into the street dressed as royalists, les incroyables et merveilleux, literally to provoke people to fight them. So, fashion's a really strong societal tool to express who you are, to express your beliefs, etc., etc. And unlike what people think about, because people think that fashion is so elitist, it's so for few people, not for... No, it's not. Fashion is for everybody. And it's actually the most accessible art form we have. Nearly everybody dresses on purpose. There are very few people who get up in the morning and don't think about what they wear. My father, who would profess that, my father would say, I'm not interested in fashion, worked for NATO, worked for the Ministry of Defence here, so was in the sort of the forces. The dress code was so strict. If you didn't wear the right suit, the right colour of sock, or you'd be ooh. So very conservative versions of fashion. A suit. Look at me. I wear a suit to tie. In my mind, I'm in a Jean-Luc Godard film, but
I love
but
that.
for everybody else, I represent conformity. But in my mind, I represent, because I lived in Paris in the mid-60s, as we said, and at that time, everybody wore a suit and a white shirt and a tie, and every beautiful young Frenchman in the Jean-Luc Godard film is wearing a tie and a suit.
Yes.
And I dress very formally for the outside appearance, for my purposes. It sparks some of the great fashions of the 1960s, sort of the Michael Caines. And I knew Margiela when it first started, because I was in Paris at the time. It's just amazing. If you go back to look at the codes of the house, because I worked with John at Margiela. So of course he was showing me all the codes of the house. John Galliano, huge, huge talent. Like a Mozart or a Da Vinci. These are cultural figures of such importance. But we're not very good at recognizing that in fashion. We tend to
We don't
diminish
recognize
fashion.
it at the moment.
We don't recognize it at the moment.
We need time to digest it, to figure it out.
And also, Western media is not very good at giving fashion the importance culturally that it should have.
I think the same, and I'm very surprised because Western fashion is quite of a big business. Coming from Italy, it's one of the industries that makes the most money in Italy, from production to distribution to marketing and everything else. And I'm fascinated how this is absolutely not represented in any type of broadcast.
Fashion is the third biggest industry in Britain, the third. So after cars and steel or whatever it would be, or I don't know what they are now, but it's like a hugely important industry. It has no representation in Parliament whatsoever. So in our seat of government, there are no lobby groups. So every other industry, film industry, the steel industry, automobile industry, sport, they all have lobby groups, which are people that go to the government and say, oh, you've got to give us some money to support this, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Fashion has nothing, nothing at all. So when Brexit happened, which as you may know is something I think is a complete mistake. And
Completely
awful,
agree with you.
Awful mistake. Anyway, when Brexit happened, I was invited to Parliament to come and meet some of the, talk to some of the government about what would happen to fashion after Brexit.
Okay.
And so I was there and I was trying to talk to them, but they already were finished. They weren't going to change. They were all going to Brexit. I remember saying, we've got to do something. You can't just let this happen. This is going to decimate the fashion industry. Britain will become so isolated. If you're creating a dress, it can go to Italy for embroidering, it can go to Germany for some other part. The dress travels around Europe. If you put these borders, it would be awful, and none of the big models, none of the big journalists are going to come here. London Fashion Week will diminish.
I have one last question for you.
Yes.
And then I will let you go. So, in the era of AI, social media content, everything else, what would you recommend to someone who is, let's say, 19, 20 years old now with a camera? What would be your advice?
Well, it depends.
How to get in the industry, how to like start a career in the direction of like fashion photography or like fashion image making?
Well, you have to follow your heart. You have to do something you really love, whatever that is. You can't really say, okay, I've got to make some money, so I'll do something I don't love. And I see a lot of students, and some are really interested in fashion, and some are thinking, well, I can make some money in fashion, but I don't really care about it. It's not. Don't do it then. You can only really get into something that you love, because it's got to become your life. You've got to live your life through your lens. And if you're not really living your life, if you're doing it as a job, then it's not, and you don't
That is
love
not
it,
what fashion
then
is
it's
about.
it's not gonna work for you. You have to love what you do. This is a strange job. Doing what I've done for 40 or 50 years is a strange job. There's no security. You don't know where your next piece of work is coming from.
I agree on that.
Your life is totally in flux all the time. You can get taken off to do one thing and another thing. Your relationships come and go. It's a very, very strange way to live your life. I would say it's the best. I don't regret anything. I think it's the best. I regret not photographing a few people, but other than that, I think it's the most exciting.
Who, for example? Give me a name.
Lady Diana, I wish I'd photographed her. Amy Winehouse, I wish I'd photographed her. There's a lot, actually, sadly. You suddenly realize when somebody dies, damn, they've gone. So I think it's a strange job to do. And if you don't really, really love it, if it's not more important than virtually anything else in your life, you won't succeed. You won't, that's not fair, because success is relative. But you won't have a career that will make you feel kind of it's what you want to do. The money isn't important. The fame is irrelevant. All those things aren't goals, really, because you don't feel satisfied because you've got a lot of money in your bank account. It just doesn't make any difference. It's what you just, example I talk about the suits.
Yeah.
Full
circle of our topics.
Exactly, yeah. So neat. So I would say to a young person, you have to work for yourself on the things you love, and that'll guide you. If you don't necessarily love fashion, then don't try and force it. But I mean, I always have done. So,
Nick, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
It's going to take me a week to digest this whole conversation. It has been so inspiring already for me. I hope for everyone else. And thank you.
My pleasure.
Nice.